Okay, you know that feeling. When you walk into a room or maybe meet someone and bam, it hits you.
That weird sense of, I've done this, I've been here.
Exactly. Even when you know, like, logically you haven't. That's déjà vu. I bet almost everyone listening has felt it.
Oh, absolutely. It's super common. The numbers are something like 60 to 80% of people say they've experienced it.
Wow, that high.
Yeah. And it seems to happen more often when we're younger, too.
Right, so that's what we're digging into today, this really strong feeling of, well, pastness in a totally new situation.
Why does it happen?
Yeah, exactly why. We've gone through the materials you sent over, the neuroscience bits from those PDF excerpts, the cultural stuff.
It's quite a range, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
From, tiny little brain glitches all the way to things that feel much more, well, cosmic or something.
So where should we start? Maybe with the science? What the brain folks think.
Sounds good. Let's start there. So, okay, neuroscience. They're not really talking time travel or anything like that.
No, definitely not. It's more grounded. They often frame it as a kind of, well, a quirky glitch in brain wiring. I like that phrase.
Me too. So it's less about reality warping and more like a momentary hiccup in how our brain's processing things,
Pretty much. And the focus often lands on the hippocampus and the areas around it.
the memory centers.
Exactly, the brain's memory engines. The thinking is maybe these parts, they just misfire for a split second.
And send out a false alarm like, hey, this is familiar.
Yeah, a false familiarity signal, even though there isn't actually an old memory to match it.
Okay, and this ties into temporal lobe epilepsy, right? That came up in the notes.
It does, yeah. It's a really interesting, though more extreme example. For some people with this condition, déjà vu can actually be a type of brief seizure,
Really? A seizure.
a very specific brief one. Researchers see these random bursts of neurons firing in the temporal lobe during these episodes. So that feeling is tied to actual electrical activity.
Wow. But for most people, people without epilepsy experiencing everyday déjà vu, it's not that dramatic.
Oh, no, not at all. In a healthy brain, it's much, much subtler. It's not a seizure. The idea is more about tiny, tiny timing differences.
Timing differences. How so?
Well, one theory, and it's quite compelling, is that we have like two pathways bringing sensory info into the brain.
Okay.
And if there's just a minuscule delay, we're talking milliseconds, between the info arriving via one path versus the other, the brain might get the same information twice, just slightly staggered, and it interprets that as, oh, I've perceived this before.
Like an echo.
Exactly, a perceptual echo, making the present feel like the past.
That's wild. A tiny brain echo causing such a strong feeling. And you mentioned something about physical differences in people who get it a lot.
Yeah, some studies suggest there might be subtle differences, tiny quirks in certain parts of the hippocampus.
Which parts?
Areas called CA3 and the dentate gyrus. They're involved in pattern separation, distinguishing similar memories.
So slight variations there might make someone more prone to these familiarity glitches.
That's the hypothesis. It's still being researched, but it suggests a potential neurological basis for why some experience it more often. Think of it like the brain's indexing system being slightly different.
Gotcha. And then there's the idea of false familiarity signals more generally, like the brain just mislabels something.
Right. Psychologist Akira O'Connor described it almost like a brain region twitching and just mistakenly yelling, familiar.
Okay. Like a faulty tagger in the memory factory?
Something like that. But what's really fascinating and newer is the research looking at the prefrontal cortex.
The decision-making part of the brain.
Exactly, and parietal areas too. When researchers manage to actually induce déjà vu in lab settings.
Which sounds tricky in itself.
Very. But when they do, they see activity light up in these frontal decision-making regions.
So it's not just the memory areas acting weirdly.
Apparently not. And the interpretation is really cool. It suggests maybe déjà vu isn't just the brain making a mistake, but maybe it's the brain detecting a mistake.
Wait, explain that.
So, the feeling of familiarity arises, maybe from one of those glitches we talked about. But then the frontal lobes kick in, compare it to actual memories, and go, hang on, this feeling doesn't match the records.
So the weird, eerie feeling is the conflict detection.
That's the idea. It could be a sign of healthy metacognition, the brain noticing a discrepancy in its own processing, like an internal fact-checker raising a flag.
Wow, okay. That puts a totally different spin on it. It's not just a bug, it's maybe part of the debugging process.
Potentially, yeah. Which leads us nicely into the cognitive side of things.
Right, so moving beyond just the brain's hardware, how does it play out in terms of like memory processes?
Well, the cognitive view really emphasizes this idea of a memory mix-up.
A conflict.
Exactly, a conflict between that strong feeling of familiarity and the simultaneous knowledge that, no, this situation is actually new.
And implicit memory plays a big role here, doesn't it? The stuff we remember without realizing we remember it.
Absolutely crucial. Think about it. You walk into a cafe you've never visited, but maybe the way the light hits the counter, or the smell of the coffee, or the pattern on the chairs. Maybe it unconsciously reminds you of something else.
Like a place from childhood. Or a movie scene.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Something you don't consciously recall at that moment, but that unconscious echo triggers the feeling of familiarity, even though you can't pinpoint why.
Ah, okay. That makes a lot of sense. Your brain's finding a pattern you didn't know was there.
Sort of, yeah. And there are a few specific cognitive theories that build on this.
Like the split-second replay one. What's that about?
That one suggests maybe you catch a glimpse of something really quick, almost subliminally, out of the corner of your eye, maybe.
Uh-huh.
Your brain processes that brief input. Then a moment later, you turn and consciously focus on the same thing. And your brain retrieves that initial fleeting impression alongside the new focused perception, creating a sensation of seeing it twice.
Like a tiny instant replay in your head.
Basically, yeah. A little stutter in attention and processing.
And the delayed processing idea we talked about with the neural pathways fits here too, right?
It does. It bridges the neuroscience and cognitive aspects. That slight timing difference between parallel processing routes could be interpreted cognitively as experiencing the same event twice.
So multiple angles pointing towards timing and processing glitches.
Pretty much. And then there's that metacognitive conflict idea, again, déjà vu, as the brain signaling error mismatch detected.
Right, the brain's internal alarm system.
And we have to touch on the premonition thing,
Yeah.
because so many people feel like they know what's coming next during déjà vu.
Oh yeah, that's a huge part of the feeling for many.
Hmm.
I know what she's going to say.
It feels incredibly real, that sense of prediction. But the research?
Doesn't back it up.
Nope. Controlled experiments just don't show any actual predictive ability. It seems much more likely that the strong feeling of familiarity tricks our brains into thinking we know what's next.
So it feels like a memory of the future, but it's really just more memory confusion.
That seems to be the most likely explanation from a scientific standpoint. It's another layer of the illusion.
Okay, so the science points towards these fascinating, complex glitches and mix-ups and brain processing and memory. But that's not how people have always seen it, is it?
Not even close. And that's where things get really interesting looking at the cultural perspectives. It's a stark contrast sometimes.
Yeah, the sources talked about how different cultures, different times, have interpreted this same odd feeling in vastly different ways.
Totally. Far from being just a neurological quirk, for many cultures, it's packed with meaning, often quite profound.
Like take ancient Greece or Rome. They weren't thinking about Hippocampal.
No. For them, it could be seen as like an omen, a message from the gods, maybe even a glimpse of fate or the future.
Wow. So a divine heads up, essentially.
In a way, yeah. Then you shift over to, say, South Asian philosophies, Hinduism, Buddhism.
And the interpretation changes again.
Completely. There, it's often connected to reincarnation. Déjà vu might be seen as a brief flash, a flicker of a memory from a past life.
Whoa. A past life memory bubbling up.
Yeah.
That's a very different framework.
It is. It frames it as a kind of karmic echo, a connection across lifetimes. You have to wonder, perhaps in cultures without our specific scientific lens, spiritual or cyclical explanations felt more natural for such a strange sensation.
Makes sense. And Australian Aboriginal lore had another take too, right? Something about Dreamtime.
That's right. In some traditions, it's interpreted as a momentary connection to the Dreamtime, that sacred, foundational era of creation.
So the past literally bleeding into the present.
In a sense, yes. A blurring of the lines between the now and the ancestral mythical past. And you see similar ideas in some Native American traditions too, experiences like this as potential communication with spirits or ancestors.
It's amazing. One feeling, so many radically different explanations, all trying to make sense of this weirdness.
And it shows how deeply culture shapes our understanding of even our own internal experiences.
Even now, in our science-heavy world, we haven't totally shaken off the mystery, have we? People still joke about it.
Right, the whole glitch in the matrix thing.
Exactly. Or evidence of parallel universes.
Yeah.
It's often said jokingly, but it still points to that feeling that maybe, just maybe, there's something more going on than just neurons.
It taps into that enduring sense of wonder or maybe unease about the nature of reality and time.
So you've got this clear contrast. Science is working towards explanations rooted in memory processes, brain structure, timing.
Neural pathways, cognitive conflicts.
Right. But culturally, across the globe and through history, déjà vu often becomes this powerful symbol, a metaphor for the connection between past and present, or self and cosmos, or even different lives.
Exactly. It serves different purposes depending on the lens you're looking through.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up a bit. Déjà vu. It's clearly this really complex thing.
Definitely multifaceted.
On one hand, we've got strong contenders from neuroscience and cognitive science.
Brain glitches, maybe in the hippocampus, these tiny processing delays, false familiarity signals.
Or memory mix-ups, implicit memories resurfacing, that metacognitive conflict where the brain flags an error.
All pointing towards the intricate and sometimes fallible workings of our own minds.
But then, layered on top of that, or maybe alongside it, you have centuries of human culture trying to make sense of it.
Absolutely, seeing it as prophecy or echoes of past lives, connections to spiritual realms, divine messages.
It really makes you pause and think about how we interpret our own experiences, doesn't it?
For sure. Whether you land on the brain hiccup side of things or you feel drawn to the more metaphorical or spiritual interpretations.
That core feeling still has a kind of strangeness, a wonder to it.
It really does. It's a potent reminder of just how weird and wonderful and sometimes downright illusory our perception of reality and memory can be.
Yeah. And maybe the final thought to leave people with is this. Even if we eventually pin down the exact neurological chain reaction that causes déjà vu, does that completely erase the subjective mystery of it?
That's a great question. Does the scientific explanation fully capture that uncanny feeling?
Right. That sudden jolting sense of, I've been here before. It still kind of forces you to question, just for a second, the nature of time and your own place in it.
A little window into the strangeness of consciousness, perhaps. Something to think about next time it happens to you.